Hello everyone, this is Goosebumps Godzilla, and today I'm going to be talking about the 35th Goosebumps book in the original series, and that is The Shocker on Shock Street. And basically, in this video, I'm going to be mainly talking about the giant praying mantises that appear for a short period of time in the book. And basically, I'm going to be asking myself the question of who really created the giant praying mantises. And so pretty much that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. But before I go into spoilers and stuff like that, I am going to be issuing a spoiler warning in this video. And so pretty much we're going to be spoiling maybe 2 or 3 Goosebumps books. And that's basically the first one being A Shocker on Shock Street. This is going to be the main book that I'm going to be talking about a lot in this video. And so yeah, I'm probably going to putting that as major spoilers because I am going to be going over that again, as I said before, prominently in this video. I'm going to be going over a quick overview of the plot and stuff like that, so definitely some major spoilers for A Shocker on Shock Street. Also, we're going to be having some minor spoilers as well for Triple Header Book 2, and that is mainly the short story in that book, which is The Mummy with My Face. And so pretty much I'm mainly going to be talking about the main antagonist of that story and really their main motivation in that book and, stuff like that. So I'm going to be having also some minor spoilers for that. I don't know, it is kind of medium-sized spoilers since it is kind of spoiling the plot at the same time. But anyways, so it's kind of medium to minor spoilers, I guess, for the Triple Header Book 2, The Mummy with My Face antagonist. But anyway, that's all we're going to be talking about in this video. So if you haven't read really A Shocker on Shock Street, then I would highly recommend you to not watch this video. If you haven't read The Mummy with My Face, I don't highly recommend you to not watch this video, but, just in case you don't want any of the book to be spoiled, I would recommend that you read Triple Header Book 2 before you watch this video. But anyway, guys, that's all we're going to be talking about in this video spoiler-wise. So let's first, before talking about the giant praying mantises and who made them, go over a quick plot overview for A Shocker on Shock Street. So basically, the book of A Shocker on Shock Street begins in a movie theater. Basically, our main protagonists, I think they're named Aaron and Marty, or so. Basically, they're watching this movie, which is part of a popular series that they like to watch. It's like a movie series, sort of, called the Shock Street films. And so basically, in each film, they have a monster or something like that, comes up on the screen and, attacks this town named Shock Street and stuff like that, from what I remember. And so pretty much at this point in time in the movie, the two kids are actually watching this movie early access in the theaters, mainly due to the main protagonist's father actually being one of the person who makes the animatronics in A Shocker on Shock Street. And so basically they finish watching the film, and then they go out and meet the main protagonist's father. I think his name's like Mr. Wright or so. So he basically makes animatronics. And so he wants them to actually, at one point in the story, to go out and test this new Shock Street ride, because apparently the films are getting so popular that they're going to make a whole entire amusement park based off the Shock Street films. And the dad actually makes all the animatronics in that park, or in that amusement park. So he invites the main protagonist, Aaron, and his or her friend, I can't really remember which one, I think it's her, but basically her friend, Marty, to basically go and test out the ride and the whole entire attraction and stuff like that. So they agree to, since they're big fans of the Shock Street films and stuff like that. So they go in and start the ride, and soon things start to go wrong. At first, it kind of just, starts out as kind of like a really cool roller coaster, sort of. And so they're just going around the Shock Street Park. I think at one point they go inside a haunted house and stuff like that, just as part of the amusement ride and stuff like that. But eventually they go into this cave called the Cave of the Living Creeps. So basically, when they go in there, they first get worms showered all over them. But then eventually, the tram sort of comes to a stop. And so they're stuck in the middle of this dark cave and stuff like that. And the tram stopped working. And so, obviously, the main protagonist and the main protagonist's friend are freaking out about this. So they go out to investigate. That's when they come across the monsters that I am going to be talking about mainly in this video, and that is the giant praying mantises. And so basically, these giant praying mantises are spitting out these dark black goo all over the place and stuff like that, and nearly gets the main protagonist. So I think at one point they actually do. Not really sure, but eventually they figure out a way to escape from them. They go outside the cave and go into the main attraction of this ride, and that is basically the Shock Street main area. And so during this point in time, a bunch of the book is just dedicated to each spot they go. They meet a new monster. Like at one point, they go into this graveyard, and these zombies are coming up. I think another point they get into like this hole. I can't remember exactly. I haven't read this book in a little while, but basically they go in, I think, some sort of hole, and there's these two werewolf-like beings, Wolf Boy and Wolf Girl or something like that. Anyway, so they get chased down by them, and one thing leads to another. They're, again, just freaking out about, they think all the animatronics are alive, and, again, they're kind of scared and stuff like that. But anyway, one thing leads to another. They basically get shut down. And so in the twist, in the end, which is probably my least favorite part about the book because the twist is really crazy, basically it's revealed that these guys are actually robots, and they were made to test out the safety of the Shocker on Shock Street ride. And so then they started malfunctioning and develop, like human personalities and stuff like that, and which was against the rules and stuff like that. And so basically the dad created them, Mr. Wright, to test out the ride and stuff like that. And that's pretty much the whole entire book of A Shocker on Shock Street. And the twist in the end is probably my least favorite part. Again, I don't know. Other than that, though, the book was pretty decent. I kind of wish there was more time dedicated to the giant praying mantises, since they appear quite prominently in the Goosebumps film, and they're all over the cover and stuff like that. And really, in the story, they're only in the book for a couple of minutes and stuff like that. And so, yeah, as a whole, I'm an okay fan of Shocker on Shock Street, my all-time favorite, but it's still pretty decent, and really decent Goosebumps book as a whole, as I said before. But anyway, so it seems quite obvious, just jumping into the main topic of this video, how, who the giant praying mantises were created by. Obviously, Mr. Wright. Supposedly, throughout the story, he created all the animatronics and stuff like that for, the Shocker on Shock Street ride and stuff like that. And so it would seem like he actually created these animatronics for the ride. And I don't know, though. It does seem kind of odd, or there are some odd things about the giant praying mantises. Like, one thing, in the Goosebumps film, you actually get to see the giant praying mantis. Instead of being a scripted animatronic, it, goes around flying and, attacking the city and stuff like that, which, doesn't really make too much sense. It would lead to evidence that actually maybe the whole entire Shock Street ride is actually real and stuff like that. But then, this is kind of disproven, though. I've previously said in the past that the giant praying mantis could be real. But then again, if you take a look at other media in Goosebumps franchise, it kind of seems to contradict this. Like, if you take a look at the cover art for the original Shocker on Shock Street novel, the giant praying mantises is, sort of gray. It's not green. It's not realistic. Well, it is kind of realistic looking, but, it looks more like a robot. It's gray. It's kind of, I think, got little screw holes and stuff like that. Anyways, also in Goosebumps Horror Town, you actually do get to see the giant praying mantises, and it's kind of a robot as well, and stuff like that. And if you take a look at basically a bunch of other cover art and stuff like that, you get to see the giant praying mantis as a robot, which is kind of weird. So basically, the giant praying mantis in the Goosebumps film is a robot. But why would the robot go around, wreaking havoc throughout the city? And it even doesn't really make too much sense in the areas where the, the giant praying mantis is, considered to be a robot. Like, if you take a look at the original cover art made by Tim Jacobus, in that cover art, you actually get to see the giant praying mantis wreaking havoc in Shock Street. And he's not even in the cave that he was supposed to be in. Animatronics have to stay in a constricted cave where they just stay and do the same thing over and over and over. And then you take a look at the original Goosebumps cover art for Shocker on Shock Street, and you get to see the giant praying mantises the giant praying mantis really out about in the main Shock Street area, not the area where the giant praying mantis is supposed to be. And it seems like he's wreaking havoc throughout Shock Street. And there's even more evidence to prove this from the end credits to the Goosebumps film. In the end credits to the Goosebumps film, they kind of feature a bunch of classic Goosebumps cover art, basically make it so they move and stuff like that. And in that area, you actually do get to see the giant praying mantis wreaking havoc throughout Shock Street. And again, you see this in a bunch of other foreign cover artwork for A Shocker on Shock Street, in which the giant praying mantis is wreaking havoc all throughout Shock Street. And even if you take a look at the actual Shock Street book, where they tell you that everything, or every monster in there, or almost everything actually, since the main protagonist and the main protagonist's brother are also robots, sort of, you get to see the giant praying mantises in there. And so again, you see in Shocker on Shock Street, according to the ending, those kids were there to test the safety of the place, of, the Shock Street area. And then pretty much everything in there, from what I remember, again, I haven't read this book in a long time, but from what I remember, almost everything in Shocker on Shock Street, almost every single monster, were relatively safe or could be done, normally. Except for the giant praying mantises. They're spitting out this disgusting, not disgusting, but I don't know if it's disgusting or not, but, this black goo that sticks to you and could be very dangerous. And then you also have the giant praying mantises that could attack you and stuff like that. And the only reason the main protagonist of them ever got away from it was because they figured out, since they were bugs, most likely not would want to be stepped on, I guess. And so they tried to stomp on their feet and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I don't know, like, say if someone visiting there is not smart enough to realize that, I guess, then they would basically be stuck in black goo and possibly attacked by the giant praying mantis. It's not really safe. Again, pretty much every single attraction at Shock Street could somewhat be construed as, safe or can be controlled. But then you take a look at the giant praying mantises, not only do you see the cover art and stuff like that, and in the Goosebumps film, where it is very dangerous and is wreaking havoc all throughout the city and stuff like that, and even in the Shock Street book, they're like the only really dangerous, animatronics in the entire Shock Street area. It's kind of weird that, that would happen. And so, kind of leads me to believe that most likely, since, the guy works for Shock Street and stuff like that, that he did, Mr. Wright basically did not actually create the giant praying mantises, and that was sent by someone, I personally think, to destroy it. Because again, you see the Goosebumps in credits scene where it's wreaking havoc. You see the original cover art. You see, the French cover art as well. A bunch of other cover arts and, stuff like that. And even in the Goosebumps film, you see a giant animatronic wreaking havoc all throughout, not Shock Street, but, just the town that the monsters are invading. So it seems like most likely that this was not created by the Shock Street team due to it not being safe. Again, it's wreaking havoc all throughout Shock Street and stuff like that. And so I personally think that was most likely created by someone else. And I think that someone else would most likely also appear in the Goosebumps film. And that could help us deduce who actually created the giant praying mantis. Because again, it couldn't have been Mr. Wright because, he works for Shock Street. And most likely when he wouldn't create, overpriced animatronics that can fly and do all this other stuff. And also make it super dangerous and stuff like that. I mean, he makes his money off of making animatronics that look real, but, not life-threatening and stuff like that. So I personally think it could be someone else. And I think personally that someone else most likely would appear in the Goosebumps film, since again, the giant praying mantis is a robot, and so thus meaning that since he's a robot, he must be controlled by someone who's making him do all these things. And so the first option I think that comes to mind for this, that kind of fits the bill almost perfectly, is Professor Shock, who appears in the Give Yourself Goosebumps book, The Creepy Creations of Professor Shock. And so basically, I haven't read The Creepy Creations of Professor Shock. Shock. Basically, I'm not really sure too much about him since I'm kind of saving the Give Yourself Goosebumps books for later. But basically, from what I remember, Professor Shock is this scientist, and he basically creates robots. And he does also appear in the Goosebumps film. And also in Goosebumps Horror Town, he's actually named as the person who made the giant praying mantises. But then again, I'm not really sure, because if you pay attention also in the Shocker on Shock Street event, in Goosebumps Horror Town, he actually created, or no, he actually worked for Shock Street as well, and basically took over the role that Mr. Wright was in the book, because the Shocker and Shock Street event is basically a loose, it's not really, doesn't really follow the book at all, almost. It sort of is. It's a loose adaptation of the original story. And in that game, he basically takes on the role of, Mr. Wright in Shocker on Shock Street. Thus meaning that most likely, I would say he would not be the one who created, the giant praying mantis. I mean, there's a lot of evidence to prove it. I mean, he is kind of evil in his book, and it would make sense for him to destroy stuff, except for the fact that he works for Shock Street, and so that wouldn't really make much sense as well. Just in the same case as Mr. Wright, why he would just go around trying to destroy things in the place that he works for, so I'm not really sure about that. And so I personally think, though, that the person who's causing all this stuff to happen, who's destroying Shock Street and stuff like that, is the main antagonist from The Mummy with My Face. So I'm not going to get into too much detail on The Mummy with My Face, but basically, in that story, there are these scientists who are trying to make this mummy-themed park. And so they actually go inside a real pyramid and illegally basically create these evil mummy robots, basically. And so in that story, they actually get, not really trap kids. Yeah, I don't know. They lure these kids inside the pyramid and then test out the animatronics with the kids and try to scare them and stuff like that. And, see if their theme park will actually work, because I guess it's going to be a horror themed park. And so I personally think this could be the most likely option, because while they do not actually appear in the Goosebumps film, it would make sense for them to be in there, since there is a mummy in the Goosebumps film that I would say most likely could. It's kind of a stretch, but basically I think personally that mummy in the Goosebumps film could possibly be one of the robots that are controlled by those people, because that mummy is credited to be Prince Koru from Return of the Mummy, and that would be kind of weird for him to be Prince Koru, mainly because of the fact has another actual really antagonist, because Prince Koru wasn't really an antagonist in his film, or not in his film, but in his book. He was actually helping the main protagonist, stuff like that, actually wanting to stay dead. So, wouldn't really make much sense for him to be in the Goosebumps film, since, the whole reason Slappy's, in the Goosebumps films destroying stuff is because he wants to live, not be in his book. So, it wouldn't really make much sense for Prince Koru to be alive, and much less work for his ancient relative, Neela Ramahad, who's also appearing in the film. And she's kind of, honestly, the main antagonist for Return of the Mummy. She wants to kill everyone, stuff like that, and take over the world. And basically, Prince Koru, when she woke him up, he got angry because he wanted to continue to sleep forever and ever and ever. So he killed her off. And so, well, not killed her off, but basically turned her into a beetle. And so, it wouldn't really make much sense for him to be in the Goosebumps film. And a real quick apology, just forgot, there are also spoilers for Return of the Mummy. I'll probably just edit that in later. I'm really sorry about that, guys. But basically, yeah, that's what happens in the Goosebumps, or in Return of the Mummy. And so, the fact that both of those antagonists appear at the same time, even when it doesn't really make much sense for Prince Koru to be in that situation, I think is another huge piece of evidence to prove that those people are actually people who are having a presence in, in Prince Koru, or supposedly Prince Koru. Also, because other than Give Yourself Goosebumps books, which do have multiple antagonists, stuff like that, from what I remember, almost every single Goosebumps monster from the Goosebumps film only comes out of one book. Again, there are the Give Yourself Goosebumps books, like Please Don't Feed the Vampire, and Deep in the Jungle of Doom, I think, are exceptions, but those are Give Yourself Goosebumps books again. So I personally think that mummy from the Goosebumps film, Prince Koru, supposedly is actually possibly could be the mummy guys from the Mummy with My Face. And so I think that is a huge piece of, or not huge, since it's kind of a stretch, but it makes sense, sort of, since, there's not really many living mummies in the Goosebumps films, like in Curse of the or Goosebumps books, like in Curse of the Mummy's Tomb. There are a bunch of random living mummies, but not really antagonists. Turn the Mummy, I already went over. The Mummy Walks, not really. There is one from the Tales Give You Goosebumps book, so there is that. So again, it is sort of stretched since there are living mummies in the Goosebumps books, but I personally think it would make sense considering that someone has to control the animatronic, the giant praying mantis animatronic, and it had to be someone with a knowledge of electronics. Professor Shock could be likely, but again, he does kind of work for Shock Street in the Horror Town event. And that was one of the biggest pieces of evidence to prove that he's actually the person who's controlling the giant praying mantis. So that is kind of a bit of a disproven piece of evidence. So I would say as a whole, it's either Professor Shock or the scientist people from the Mummy with My Face. Also, another bit of evidence that kind of helps prove that they want to destroy Shock Street is also because they're kind of crazy and stuff like that. I don't know if that's actually a big piece of evidence. But anyway, guys, tell me what you think in the comments section below. There's not a lot of evidence to prove that the people from the Mummy with My Face are the actual people, but it does make sense since, they kind of will do anything to, have a theme park and stuff like that. And, stuff like that. And they also like to scare children. Possibly they're working for a theme park and they really want to scare children, kind of like how they were in The Mummy with My Face. I don't know, guys. Tell me what you think in the comments section below. From, what I went over, I personally think it's either going to be Professor Shock or the scientist from The Mummy with My Face. But again, tell me what you think in the comments section below. Apologies for how long this video is, and also apologies for not uploading in like 3 or 4 weeks. Really big apologies for that. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. And that's the end.